Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivers for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for August the 16th. I am your host, Keith Alsep. This is episode number 1279, and we've got two very special guests lined up for you today. First, we will be joined by Emily Adams from the Greenville News. We'll talk briefly about the commitment of Madisen McDaniel, a little bit about the team, and then we will ask Emily the question everybody is wondering, why she did not include the Gamecocks in her top 25 in the AP poll, as she was selected this year to be the beat writer by the Associated Press who would cast a ballot. Then we will be joined by Owen, Hale, McGranahan. We'll talk Gamecock football, and from both of these special guests, we'll get their biggest takeaways thus far from player interviews. We'll talk about position battles, the secondary, and much, much more. All right, so, excuse me. Let's jump right into our Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines, brought to you by Nana's Porch. Nana's Porch is an award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte, North Carolina area. Whatever your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a corporate event, a wedding, a big backyard bash to end the summer or bring in the fall with a whole hog barbecue, Nana's Porch has got you covered. You want to bring in a food trailer? Nana's Porch voted among the top 3 food trailers in Charlotte by the local newspaper poll. And as we all know, their pimento cheese voted numero uno by the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association in the meat and cheese category. Go to nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne and support this Gamecock-owned and operated business. He will be providing the meal at the Carolina Rise tailgate, which is literally will be in the shadow of Bank of America Stadium. We'll be getting underway at 2:30 in the afternoon that day. Plenty of time. Get your tickets while you can. There'll be free alcohol while it lasts, both different kinds of cocktails and cold beer. Tea and colas and water, or you can bring your own cooler over. So you get the catered meal. There will be raffles for prizes. There'll be giveaways. And more than likely you're going to have the chance to meet some big-time guests. And I'm not talking about me or JC or John Whittle, but we are anticipating some big-time special guests who will be joining the show or the tailgate. And so you don't want to miss that. 2:30 to 6:30, we'll shut it down, get ready to go into what should be a sold-out Bank of America Stadium for the Battle of the Carolinas, South Carolina and North Carolina. And you have to like it, because the last time South Carolina played North Carolina in that stadium, it turned out pretty good. It was a beatdown. Gamecocks rushed for over 200 yards. Jaheim Bell went nuts. DeCarrion Joyner had the performance of a lifetime, and South Carolina really never in jeopardy in that game. 38-21, just bulldozing North Carolina with Sam Howell, who played in that game. And not only College Game Day is going to be there, but you have Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit on the call. The last time the Gamecocks had Fowler and Herbstreit on the call was in Williams-Brice Stadium last November, when the Gamecocks ended Tennessee's college football playoff hopes by boat racing the Vols 63-38. I still don't think Cousin Shane has recovered from that. And my guy Michael W. Bratton still picked the Gamecock, Spencer Rattler 9th among SEC quarterbacks. So I think the Vols are a little salty and are anxiously awaiting South Carolina's trip to Neyland Stadium in the rematch. All right. So there are only 16 more days without Carolina football. Then September the 2nd, we'll get there. Okay, I highly encourage everybody. Sold over 170 tickets for the tailgate. There are no more parking spaces available, but you can go to carolinarise.com and get a ticket to the tailgate. It's going to be massive. It's going to be huge. There's going to be entertainment, and there are going to be, we anticipate, big-time special guests. And not only that, but you'll be supporting one of South Carolina's collectives, Carolina Rise. I can tell you right now, okay, you may not believe it, you may not want to hear it, but the collectives, Carolina Rise and Garnet Trust, okay, the collectives are the central, most important driving force behind the future success of South Carolina athletics. You don't want to lose players in the portal. You got to have money in the collectives. You want to get big-time recruits, you need Park Avenue that can market a Nicholas Harbor, a Dylan Stewart, and others. You want to keep guys that were under the radar like a Nick Eamon-Warrior, DQ Smith. What if they're All-Americans after this year? Okay, you need the collectives. You don't want to lose Gilbert Edmond and Jordan Birch and Marshawn Lloyd and others to the portal. You need the collectives. You want to go and get more guys out of the portal. South Carolina lost several guys over basically peanuts in the portal. Okay, you don't want to lose Jalewis Solomon. You don't want to lose Jonathan Paylor. Well, you need the collectives. And so go to carolinarise.com, sign up for a membership, get a $10 tailgate ticket. You don't want to miss this tailgate, I guarantee it. All right. Former Gamecock, All-American, and really one of the building blocks of Dawn Staley's program at South Carolina. Tiffany Mitchell, it was announced just a few minutes ago. Her jersey will be retired this year, the number 25 jersey, not her number. South Carolina is not in the business of retiring numbers anymore, just jerseys, okay? Her number 25 will go up in the rafters. That number worn now by Raven Hollywood Johnson, who I think will end up her career as one of the top point guards ever at South Carolina. But Tiffany Mitchell came before the winning started. She was a former top 10 prospect who had a major knee injury, missed her junior year, dropped in the rankings. But she grew up in Charlotte, and she had a Dawn Staley Charlotte Sting jersey hanging up in her room. And when Dawn Staley recruited her, she jumped at the chance to leave North Carolina, which at that point Sylvia Hatchell still had it rolling, and chose to come with South Carolina. And so here's the press release. Dawn Staley says, retired jerseys may seem cliche for some, but for me, they showcase players of our program who have demonstrated excellence on and off the court. It shows the legacy they contributed to women's basketball and women's sports. For a player like Tiffany, who believed in Gamecock women's basketball before we ever won a title, really of any kind, and bought into the vision from day one, this is incredible. She paved the way for our team to become the best. Coaching players like Tiffany is one of my greatest rewards. She's not just an amazing player. She is an example of what you can become with the right mindset, commitment, and determination. I'm super proud of her then and now. Mitchell, I believe the first, or at least, just the second sophomore in league history to be named SEC Player of the Year. She won that award again in 2017. As a junior. And then the 6'5" gal came along named Asia Wilson, and she took that award away from her. But Tiffany Mitchell was just the fourth Gamecock to become an All-American and 3 times SEC, All-SEC player. She was the leading scorer in South Carolina's first SEC regular season championship team in 2014. Her sophomore season, she led the Gamecocks to 2 more titles during her career. In 2015, she powered South Carolina the first of 4 straight SEC tournament championships. Tiffany Mitchell, one of my all-time favorite players, just a great guard. I think only about the second time in my life I've been on ESPN. We were sitting right behind the bench in College Station in 2016, and she hit a 3 from the corner, and as soon as she shot it, it was a tight game. I just stood up with my arms up, and you can see me in the shot. I think there's some, if you ever watch the Notre Dame game from 1984, you'll see me and my friends a couple of times behind the Carolina bench. So congrats to Tiffany Mitchell. Earlier in the week, it was announced Alshon Jeffrey will have his number 1 jersey retired. That will be at halftime of the Mississippi State game. I believe that's September the 23rd. November 12th, I'm pretty sure will be the Gamecocks home opener. That will be against Maryland. That's when Mitchell's jersey will be retired. All right, just a couple more news and notes, and then we will get to our special guest. Gamecocks make the top 5 for class of 2025 quarterback Ryan Montgomery, 6'3", 215 out of Findlay, Ohio. His dad, former NC State great quarterback Shane Montgomery. Also, I believe that was the head coach maybe at Miami of Ohio, one of those MAC schools. Joining the Gamecocks in that group, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, and Penn State. All right, and Gamecock 2026 quarterback commitment, Landon Duckworth, 6'3", 190 out of Jackson, Alabama. 24/7 Sports coming out with their initial top 247 for the class of 2026. Duckworth comes in at number 50 overall, the number 50 player in the country. All right, so when we bring Hale McGranahan in, we'll save some other recruiting tidbits to talk with him. But up first will be Emily Adams from the Greenville News right after this commercial message.
If you enjoy listening and watching the Free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter at KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/Gamecock Pod Daily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, and we welcome back into Gamecock Pod Live Emily Adams from the Greenville News, covering all things Gamecocks for my former newspaper. And when there was an actual print edition, as a boy, my dad had a paper route as a side gig. And on the weekends, I'd get up at 4 a.m. with him to go deliver the paper. I actually think it was earlier than that because we had to roll them up and put the rubber bands around them to get ready to toss them out into the yards. There were no machines to click on to pull up your articles back then.
Too funny. I'll always be a print newspaper person in my heart. My parents got the Philly Inquirer every day, still do as far as I know. So yeah.
So I'm still that way about books. Like, I don't want to read a book off of a Kindle or my iPad. I want to hold the book, feel the pages. There's a certain scent that a book has. And then when a book is so enticing that you just can't wait to turn the page to get to the next chapter, there's nothing like that.
Yeah, I've got my little bookshelf in the other room here. I am very much the same. I'm a print and paper kind of girl.
I like it. A little old school there in the new school with Emily Adams. All right, so we're going to talk women's basketball. Dawn Staley picking up a major commitment over the weekend. I think this has kind of been expected, but we wanted to let her have her moment. It was delayed. I didn't realize they were going to play that Under Armour event outside. I guess it was outside.
I didn't either.
And so there was bad weather. It got canceled, but she made her decision and announced for South Carolina Madisen McDaniel, 5'8" point guard from Bishop McNamara High School, ranked as high as number 2 by the Blue Star Scouting Service, number 10 overall by Prospects Nation, and number 11 by ESPN. And I kind of see a lot of Zia Cook in her game. Your thoughts on Madisen McDaniel and seemingly every single year Dawn Staley getting her pick as the ultimate point guard. She zeroes in on the point guards that are most like her, I think at least. And so your thoughts on the addition of Maddie McDaniel, who will undoubtedly be another McDonald's All-American. What kind of player is South Carolina getting?
Yeah, my first thought when I saw her was that she completely makes sense as a kind of player that Dawn would go after. I mean, just super physical, super scrappy, really, really defensive forward, from what I saw of some of her highlights, which is obviously something that Dawn in this program has always prioritized. And something I think they don't have a ton of this year, which I think is what makes Maddie a good addition coming into 24 to kind of bolster that defense on the guard side. And yeah, I mean, they're set at point guard as long as they want to be at this point. But yeah, I mean, I think her commitment definitely will make it less likely for them to land somebody like Jelani Cambridge, who will want to play point guard as well. But she's, that one I don't know that they were as confident in as they are about McDaniel. So I think she's a great pickup for them. I think she'll develop well under Dawn. It really makes sense from a fit perspective, just seeing her play a little bit.
All right, so she is the first birdie in the nest for 2024, but Gamecock fans are certainly hoping she will not be the last, and obviously she won't be. South Carolina has recently lost a couple of targets. I thought they were probably the favorites for Kennedy Ume from out of the DMV. She chose to go play in the Pac-4 with a coach that, quite frankly, I don't know that will be there the rest of her career. And so with that one gone, who do you think are the best bets to join Madisen McDaniel in this class?
Yeah, I mean, we just had yesterday, Zach Randolph's daughter, McKinley Randolph, announced South Carolina top 5. I believe she's a top 20 kid in for ESPN. I want to say she's around like the 18, 17 range. But she announced South Carolina into her top 5 along with no other huge school. I think it was Notre Dame, Duke, and Louisville were the big one. Oh, and Michigan State, obviously, because her dad's a Michigan State guy. So that one's looking promising. South Carolina normally doesn't do great with the West Coast kids. So to even make a top 5 there is good. And it seems like she is leaning towards the East Coast, obviously based on that top 5 with Duke and Notre Dame and Louisville. So that's a good one out of Sierra Canyon, which is obviously a, really well-known program that's produced a lot of talent over, the years and decades. And then, you know, obviously you've got sort of the crown jewel of the class will be Joyce Edwards, you know, a Columbia kid who, and, you know, Dawn has not let too many of those in-state, especially Columbia kids go in the last couple of years, at least out of high school. So, I mean, Joyce is one where, you know, you're dealing with a number one prospect. There's always going to be competition for it. There's always going to be some uncertainty, but I like their odds based on, you know, all recent history.
All right, good stuff. So the majority of the non-conference schedule has been put together, and I think it's a lot tougher than last year's for sure. I think with a young team, Dawn Staley wants to get them ready right off the bat. Obviously, opening the season in Paris, France. Have you already got your ticket booked and hotel reserved?
One, unfortunately, but hopefully that's my goal is to be there. We're working out some kinks on the business side, but hopefully we'll get to be part of that experience.
All right. So after that, they'll fly back over the pond, and I mean, Notre Dame will be a top 10 team. I think a Final Four contender this year with Niall Ivey. Maryland is always tough at North Carolina and at Duke, essentially back to back on November 30th and December 3rd. A week later, they fly up to the Mohegan Sun Arena in Connecticut in the Basketball Hall of Fame showcase and take on Sweet 16 Utah, who I think may have won the Pac-12 tournament last year.
They had that weird Washington State win.
That's right. Maybe it was the regular season.
They were the regular season winners.
Yeah, that's it. And then they'll play Stanford at home. They'll host Clemson. They'll host South Dakota State. They will play at East Carolina, which is, as we have talked about a little bit off air, not a layup necessarily. There will be an HBCU game, and then UConn in February on a Sunday at what will undoubtedly be a sold-out Colonial Life Arena. I mean, a very challenging non-conference schedule, especially considering you're going to play on the road at Tennessee and at LSU and at Arkansas in the league as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is. She's throwing them into the fire, that's for sure. And I mean, that's nothing new. That's something they've done over the last few years. And I think obviously with the freshies being gone, scheduling got a little bit easier, I think. So yeah, I mean, I really like the UNC Duke trip. I think that's going to be really good sort of measuring sticks for them in terms of you're playing teams that are definitely top 25 teams, but maybe not necessarily in that, you know, elite top 5, top 10 echelon. So I think that'll be a good test for them, especially early in the year, to just see where things are and sort of how far they've fallen from last year, if they've fallen, and what needs to sort of get together before SEC play starts. And yeah, I mean, Stanford coming into town obviously makes that a little bit easier than going all the way cross country. But yeah, they're going to be on the road quite a bit. I mean, obviously up to Connecticut is a bit of a pain of a trip because Unackisville is not exactly, you know, the world's most accessible town. But yeah, I mean, I like the matchups. I like that we're getting to see so many of them early. And I think we've seen a trend towards that overall. I mean, if you look at, you know, Duke's schedule, like Duke's non-conference slate is really brutal. I mean, you're just seeing a lot of these teams, it feels like, put some more energy towards upping the competitiveness in the non-conference. And that's exciting after we didn't get a whole lot of that last year from really anybody except for Tennessee, who then just kind of didn't really live up to the expectations and didn't give us the competitive matchups that I think, everyone hoped that they would be. So it should be a fun fall on the basketball side. I'm really looking forward to it.
All right, so they have released the roster for this year, and so there are a couple of kind of perplexing heights listed on a couple players, and so I wanted to get your thoughts on Tessa Johnson, listed at 6'1". Is that a typo, or did she grow 2 or 3 inches over the summer?
You could convince me that she's scraping 6 foot. 6'1" might be a little bit generous, but I mean, I don't on pure eye test. I mean, I truly have no set, but on pure eye test, I would say she's probably a little closer to what her height was listed coming in than what it is now. But you could convince me that she's can touch 6 foot on her toes.
All right, and Malaysia Fulwiley, we'll just call her Lay. That's a lot easier, especially for me. Listed at 5'10". I don't know. Maybe could we split the difference? Is she a legitimate 5'8"? I mean, because there are like a lot of these ESPN heights were like from their freshman or sophomore year before the pandemic. And so what do you think on Fulwiley?
Yeah, I would say she's probably hovering around 5'8". I think her high school coach had said 5'7" back in like January, February when I had spoken to him back when she was dunking in games at allegedly 5'5". But yeah, I think 5'8", 5'7", 5'8" is probably about right for her. 5'10" definitely is giving her a couple. But she's definitely not as small as she was a couple of years ago. She's definitely had a little bit of a growth spurt and is a little bit more in a college body now, I think.
All right, good stuff. So obviously during the season we'll have a lot more about that. So let's move to football. Congratulations on being selected to be an AP voter this year. That's a kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it's been an experience so far, that's for sure. One poll in, but
all right, so maybe we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So overall, from the interviews, from the open media availability at practice, from what the coaches and players have said, what are maybe not overall impressions, but just what are your key takeaways from Gamecock football practice up until today, which, we're 16 more days until the season opener?
Getting close. Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of the big ones have just been around Rattler and around Dowell Loggins as well. I mean, I think we talked about a little bit offline. Spencer made, I think, the most explicit comments he's made about last year's offense. And even so, they were pretty measured. But I mean, he said explicitly yesterday, I think this offense suits me a lot better than the one we ran last year. And I think that's absolutely going to be true. I mean, every indication that we've gotten is that Loggins is really collaborative with the players, which I think is something that comes from his NFL background. And that, he's used to working with adults and not college kids, much more so. And so I think, with a guy like Spencer, who's older, who's experienced, who's, now been established at South Carolina for a year, has a good relationship with, with Shane and with the rest of the team. I think the two of them have been able to really build this around what Spencer wants it to be. And I think that can only be a good thing for him, especially. I mean, we saw last year when the playbook got thrown out the window at the end of the season, how he looked. And so I think if Dowell is able to unlock that again, this is a really, really competitive offense purely just on that basis. I think obviously the run game still looks not great. DK Joyner, we've heard nothing but good things about coming out of the running back room, but at the end of the day, it's a new position in SEC football as a fifth-year senior. And that's never going to translate as well when you've got, the Quinshon Judkins and the Rocket Sanders, still hanging out in the league. It's just not, the run game is not going to be competitive in the way that an elite SEC run game is. I think just the question for me is if the passing game is going to be able to compensate for that and is going to be able to compensate for what might be some growing pains on defense, because the secondary is very young this year. And, there's a lot of turnover on the line and on the edge without, losing Zach Pickens was a big deal from a leadership perspective, losing both your starting linebackers. Obviously you're upgrading talent wise, but you don't have, necessarily the same level of experience. So I think they're in a really interesting place coming into the season. I don't feel like I totally know what to make of them at this point.
All right. So let's talk about injuries. So Juice Wells has not been on the practice field. He may be the best wide receiver. He's certainly the most productive returning wide receiver in the SEC. He's an All-America candidate. He and Spencer Rattler have a, great connection. What are you hearing on the health of Juice Wells, and how likely is it he could be a game time decision on September the 2nd?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me based on the indications that we got after the scrimmage on Saturday. It seems like, all of the other injuries that are going on, Trey Knox obviously didn't practice in the scrimmage. We talked about David Spalding offline a little bit, has been banged up still from last year. You've got Tyreek Johnson's been in the blue jersey at practice, but those Beamer was all very much like, they'll be back within the next week. It's minor, camp, bumps and scrapes, which is going to happen, especially early in camp when you're kind of getting a feel for your body again in a lot of ways. But I think with Juice, Beamer said it was a lower body issue with him. Same as he said for Reed McKeska, who's expected to be out for a couple of weeks as well. So yeah, I'm not expecting to see Juice on the practice field much leading up to game one. And I think it'll depend in game week whether he's able to go at all, how much he's able to go. Because having him for that game is a very big deal. If this was last year and it was Georgia State, you could say, sit him, it's not worth it, let him get healthy. But when you're going up against a team like North Carolina that is very weak defensively, traditionally, historically, but obviously has one of the more high-powered offenses in the country, they're going to put up points on you, and the way that you beat them is by putting up more. So that's without Juice, I think that becomes a much taller task. Although I will say there's a lot of excitement around Omega Blake in the building as sort of the next guy stepping into those first team reps. He was not somebody who was super high on the radars last year, but his name has been coming up over and over and over again during camp as a guy who is going to be an impact player this year.
All right. So without Juice Wells, I kind of think you're probably looking at Xavier Leggett. Those guys from the country sometimes pronounce it a little bit different. Amarian Brown, Joshua Simon, and Trey Knox. I think we'll see a lot of 12 personnel. I think you'll see Blake mixed in. But so one young guy, obviously everybody wants to know about, Nicholas Harbor. The impressions that he has made thus far, and my guy Bruce Feldman, who I think is maybe the best college football writer in the country, he annually publishes the list of, he calls them his freaks, the biggest freak athletes for this season. I don't think he's ever had a true freshman on the list, but this year, not only is Nicholas Harbor on the list, he is number 1 on Bruce Feldman's list of freak athletes at 6'5", 243 with legitimate 10-2 100-meter speed. Can he live up to the hype, and what do you see his role on this team, at least for the early part of 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Harbor, the thing with Harbor that's the big question is that he is changing positions. You know, in high school, he was a tight end, an edge rusher. I mean, he played both sides of the ball, and he played a lot more physical roles than he's going to play at South Carolina, which, you know, as a track person myself, I think is very smart. I think, you know, avoiding him from having to put on edge rusher type weight is going to be really, really important for his track. And, you know, having a wide receiver body is going to translate the best in that regard. I think the real question is just his hands. You know, we haven't seen him catch a ton in practice. You know, obviously he's got the straight line speed to do it, but it'll be interesting to see just in terms of like route running, does he have any of that shiftiness and that ability to break tackles that, you know, has been so successful for Juice. And at his size, obviously you hope that he will be sort of a big yards after the catch guy, but the question I think right now is just, can he catch? And can he actually, you know, be a receiver outside of being fast?
All right, so where do you see the position battles on the offensive side of the ball?
I think the O-line right now, it seems like the big one is Tyshawn Wanamaker and Sidney Fugar are sort of battling for one of those tackle spots. Other than that, it seems like the O-line is fairly settled, which is a little bit surprising, but good. I think it's encouraging. Yeah, Fugar, we actually just spoke to him yesterday, and he's been touted a lot as a really strong guy in pass protection, which if you're not going to have too much of a run game, that's a guy you want starting. So it would not surprise me a bit to see him out there for the first reps in week 1. Other than that, I think there is one at wide receiver. I mean, especially if Juice is out for that first week, it becomes a conversation, I think, largely between Nick Harbor and Omega Blake. But I mean, even I could see either of them challenging Amari and Brown, even once Juice gets back. I mean, I know Justin Stepp was really high on Xavier Legette after the summer. He had said he had one of the best preseasons on the team. But AB, I feel like, you know, he was the one running for a lot of those deep shots last year. And so that's where you see maybe a Nick Harbor type of guy, you know, take some reps there and see how it goes. Other than that, I feel like the offense is somewhat set. That's, you know, I feel like the battles really are happening a little bit more on the defensive side right now. But yeah, those I think are the big two currently to have an eye on.
All right, so perfect segue, because we are going to talk about defense. But so on yesterday's show, I do a 5 guys segment every preseason for every class. And so we did the 5 most valuable defenders, I think, for the 2023 season. And one guy on that list does not play defense. He is probably the best punter to ever play at the University of South Carolina. Maybe Max Runiger, who was the punter when George Rogers played. But Kai Kroger, he is the least talked about member of this football team, but yet he may be the most valuable to Clayton White in his defense because of his ability to flip the field and pin teams inside the 20. 50% of his punts inside the 20. You go to the Clemson game, 6 different times the ball was killed inside the 10 and 3 times inside the 5. I still love seeing those shots of Pete Limbo with the smile and the arm up in the air. But just how big is having a guy like Kai Kroger for Clayton White in the defense? Because, you know, there are some unsettled positions there and some positions where there's not a lot of depth.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one where the depth is lacking, obviously, is edge rusher for the defense. And so I think, you know, just in terms of being able for Kai, I think it's so important for them to have field position this year, because I think, especially in some of those early games, they're not really going to be able to limit explosive plays in the way that they want to. You know, last year they really struggled defending the run. You know, they've got a cannon for an arm in week 1 that they're going up against with a pretty young secondary, probably, you know, two guys on the secondary who haven't started before, outside of, you know, Dial, Eamon Mori, and DQ Smith. And then, you know, you're not going to get to the quarterback probably, you know, unless Jordan Strawn's knee has been, you know, had some magic performed on it during surgery. You know, I think it's going to be a slow start for that defense. And so, you know, I think that makes the special teams all the more important, because, you know, if the offense can't necessarily compensate for, you know, what's going on with the defense, the special teams can at least set them up for success the best way possible, I think. And yeah, I mean, with Kai, we obviously got to see Kai at SEC Media Days, which was great. He was, I think, the only specialist there, which is very South Carolina. So yeah, I mean, I think we're poised for another big year from him. I can't imagine a world where he drops off in any way.
All right, so Kai Kroger has never thrown an incomplete pass.
Greatest quarterback on the roster by passer rating. I mean,
his passer rating was 489.5, which is just ridiculous, right? So does Kai Kroger finish his career at South Carolina with a perfecto in the passing game?
I mean, I sure hope so. It would be kind of, I think it would be jarring at this point to see him miss one. I mean, we all see Kai Kroger get the ball in his hands in the press box, and we're like, all right, here we go. Everybody delete your pre-write. But, I mean, I think Pete does a really good job of putting him in situations where he's not going to miss. And I think that's sort of an underrated thing. Obviously, Kai, you know, has those high school quarterback skills still, and it's something he works on. He practices passing. You know, they practice those trick plays. But I think what Pete does really well is he puts Kai into situations where he feels comfortable doing it, where they have, you know, backup plans, they have second reads if the first one doesn't work out, again, because Kai has that understanding as a former quarterback. And so I think he is so set up for success anytime they're going to put the ball in his hands, because they're not going to do it unless, you know, they think it's going to work. They're pretty confident it's going to work. And so I think he benefits a little bit from that. But also, I mean, a perfect passer rating over 4 years is no joke. So, I mean, and it's not like he's thrown a pass, you know, he's got 2 touchdowns under his belt at this point. So yeah, I mean, it'll be a fun one to see. I think now it's just exciting what they're going to pull out of the bag every year, you know, just, it's always, I mean, they were breaking out new stuff at the end of last year. So it feels like, you know, Pete sort of has a never ending bag of tricks. So, you know, excited for what comes out of it this year.
No doubt. All right. So 2 more before we let you go real quick. So to me, there are 2 linchpin players on the defense. Let's start up front. Tonka Hemingway. he was my number one most valuable member of the defense for this year because old Travian Robertson, he played on the best defensive lines in school history. And he played with a guy named Melvin Ingram, who was about 265 pounds.
Heard of him.
And he played defensive end on rundowns, and then on passing downs, they would slide him inside and bring in this guy. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Clowney.
Yeah, once or twice.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. And so Travian Robertson at the Birdies with Beamer, I thought to me that was like eyebrow raising. If you remember Mr. Spock from Star Trek, you could see the eyebrow going up and him saying fascinating. Was Tonka Hemingway reminded him of Melvin Ingram. And so with the lack of depth at edge, does Tonka Hemingway play defensive end on early downs and then in passing downs slide inside where he's clearly shown to be a disruptive figure because of his initial burst and quickness, and they bring in another edge rusher like they did in the Spurrier era with Brad Lowen? They called it the Rabbits package.
Yeah, I mean, I think we will almost definitely see him play both spots, especially if Tyreek Johnson is out or is not full health to start week 1. Like I said, he's been practicing. I think he should be good to go, but he's been in the blue jersey, which is for no contact. So there's sort of a little bit of a question mark there. And then obviously with Strong coming off the ACL, I mean, they're just so thin at edge. And I think for a guy like Tonka, who is experienced and is healthy, those are kind of the two. They don't have anybody with both right now. They've got healthy or experienced. And so I think, especially in some of those early games to help set the tone, they're going to need to move him around a little bit on that line. But it's hard. You don't want to move him off of that interior either, because, him and Boogie Huntley, I think, on that D line are a great pairing. I think they could have a really good year, but it's just hard with the lack of personnel, I think, for them to get a consistent group in there to anchor it. So I think having someone like Tonka move around will help stabilize things in some ways.
All right. So from our conversation, I'm kind of gathering that you do not have South Carolina in your top 25 because of the question marks on defense. Fair or unfair, Clayton White is on the hot seat this year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know that it's the hot seat per se, but I think he is sort of in the position that Marcus was in last year, where it's not full, we're coming into the season going, if this isn't better, you're getting fired. But if it goes really badly, I think that's where he's in dangerous territory. And I think it has the potential to go that way. Because that's I think with Marcus Satterfield last year, I think if, things had gone better earlier in the year, if you don't lose to Mizzou, if you don't lose to Florida, specifically the way that you lose to Florida, if you, hang in better with Georgia, if you, don't look like a mess against Georgia State, the perception of Marcus is very different. And so I think for Clayton, that's the key, is avoiding, if he can avoid disasters, I think he'll be okay. But if it starts to look ugly, I think it's probably going to be a bit of a foregone conclusion once the season's done.
All right. So final question before we let you go. I think the other linchpin on the defense is DQ Smith. He started 11 games last year, the first 8 at nickel, because David Spalding, after Texas A&M, he got injured the Texas A&M game and missed the rest of the season. Then he started the final 3 games at safety. And so where do you think DQ Smith plays, because for me, if Spalding's not healthy, I like him at the nickel, particularly against teams that run like North Carolina. Like Drew May was also their leading rusher last year. Certainly Georgia is a run-heavy team early in the season. Furman is going to be a run-heavy team. And so if he's at nickel, I think freshman Jalen Kilgore is at safety. But if he's at safety, then I think it's probably Spalding or potentially Keenan Nelson Jr., or maybe even Kilgore, because he may be one of the best five. Your thoughts on how that could shake out?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think, if Spalding is healthy to go at nickel, which again has been kind of a question with him and is still a question now. But if he's healthy to go at nickel, I expect him to start there week one, purely on the basis of experience. I think, he had a lot of good games last year. I thought he was, a solid, not a detriment to them at any point last year when he was stepping in for Cam Smith. And so I think at least to give them some stability in those early games, it would not surprise me to see him start there. But I like DQ at nickel. I think that's a good spot for his skill set. They've got a lot of really talented guys in that, freshman group with the defensive backs. Bakari Swain, was a highly touted guy coming in. Obviously we've talked about Kilgore has been sort of a high stock riser early on, and Judge Collier as well has been talked about pretty heavily by the coaches as a guy who could contribute. So I think we'll see them play with those rotations, honestly, fairly often in some of the early games to figure out what the best five are. Because I don't know that, you necessarily will be able to determine that until you've seen them play a real defense. Because ultimately, I think you only learn so much about your rotations by playing yourself. You learn the guys that know the guys on your team the best, but who's going to be able to make adjustments and to adapt to those different, when you're going from a North Carolina to a Furman to a Georgia, those are three very different, styles of play, three different games that you're going to have to figure out. So it might be a guy like Spalding in that sense, just that he knows how to do that better. But I would love to see some of those freshmen get real reps this year and sort of prep for the future in that way.
All right, Emily, great stuff as always. Can't thank you enough for being with us today. Be well, stay hydrated, stay out of the heat as much as you can. Welcome to Columbia.
Yeah, this is my first preseason, my first full preseason here. So they were not joking about that humidity.
So Columbia is built directly above the 7th level of Hale. All right. Factually, Columbia is kind of like in the bottom of a bowl, because in the Ice Age, the ice went over Columbia. And so it's kind of like sitting in the bottom of a bowl, and that's why you get all the humidity as well as the heat. And true story, walking out of my dorm for summer school before 8 o'clock in the morning to go to a summer school class, literally walk out of the dorm, and before I can get to the sidewalk on Sumter Street, which was less than 50 yards, it looked like somebody had sprayed me with a water hose. It was so humid.
That's not how we look coming out of open practices lately. So yeah, that rings true.
All right. Well, hey, Emily, thanks again. Be well, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Pleasure as always. Thanks, Keith.
All right. That is Emily Adams from the Greenville News. We'll be back to wrap it up right after this commercial message. All right, and we welcome back into Gamecock Pod Live the hardest working man on the beat of Gamecock football and recruiting, Owen Hale McGranahan. It's a big Hale yes. Do you and Dowell still kid about that? Well, I guess I don't know how much have you got to talk to him.
I mentioned it to him, I think in June when I was out there for camp, and I was talking to him for a minute. I think I might have said something to him. But yeah, no, it hadn't been too much of a long running joke quite yet. We'll see if that changes. But if he just remembers Hale, I'm cool with that. But if he wants to call me Owen, I guess that's cool as well.
All right, so Hale, here's really the most burning question: is how enjoyable is it for a Braves fan to watch the Atlanta Braves essentially own the New York teams in August of 2023?
I love it. I hate the Mets. I won't give them the full name that I refer to them as when the camera's off. But I enjoy watching the Braves beat them and beat them handily. And of course the Yankees too. My heart still hurts from that 96 World Series. So yeah. I didn't watch the game on Tuesday night because we're eating dinner and getting cleaned up. And by the time I looked at the score, it was 5-0. I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to mess with the mojo. I'm just going to let it ride. Won't turn it on. And the game was over like a half hour later. So really, really nice to take 2 series in a row against the New York teams. Pretty cool.
No doubt about it. Marcell Ozuna is hotter than a $10 Rolex right now. He is just mashing the baseball. Yeah. All right, so we got limited time today, and so before we get into fall camp, team stuff, player interviews, what you've gleaned from fall camp, 1 week from today, Meridian, Mississippi running back Daniel Hale is scheduled to make his announcement. Hale, what's the very latest?
Yeah, still sounds like good news for the Gamecocks. We'll see what ultimately transpires on next Wednesday, a week from today. I guess you could say there's some cautious optimism on South Carolina side of the deal. Like they're hearing good things, but aren't ready to start cutting backflips and count them as one of their own just yet because they got to get through the finish line. That's what I like to say, and we'll see how that plays out. Apparently, he'll still take visits elsewhere even after he commits wherever he commits. So, maybe if they don't get him next Wednesday, possibly they could still pull it off down the road. So we shall see. But continue to hear good things for Carolina, and that would be a massive get for them if they can add him to the class and get their 2 running backs like they've wanted to do, and count him, even though he'd be the second commitment, count him as that top guy because they really like him. He's been targeted as one of their top guys for, I guess, probably the entire calendar year now, and it would just be a tremendously big pickup.
All right, good stuff. So according to the other USC, Southern Cal 24/7 site, they interviewed their highest rated commitment. That is Atlanta defensive end Cameron Fountain, a guy South Carolina and Sterling Lucas had recruited very aggressively. He went out there and made his first official visit and committed. Now he says he will set an official visit with South Carolina this fall. How excited should Gamecock fans be about this?
Very. I mean, this is a guy who, going all the way back to June, like 2 weeks after he committed, I was writing on the Big Spur that the door hadn't been closed. He's allowed South Carolina to keep it open, and Sterling Lucas being a big reason why. And Now that he's on the record, Cam Fountain's on the record talking about taking an official visit to South Carolina, that's huge. You never quite know until the guy says it. Like I say, me putting stuff out there on things I hear behind the scenes. And yeah, I mean, he's been to South Carolina before. I think maybe some people might not quite remember that he's taken, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, could be more, unofficial visits to Columbia. So it's not like they're, fighting a battle to, let's just try to get this guy on campus and hopefully he'll like what he sees. Like he's been around Columbia plenty of times. Like he knows the lay of the land. He's met with the coaches and built some relationships there. So I would say the Gamecocks have a better than fighting chance to pull this flip off potentially down the road and add another talented defensive end to the class. Being from Atlanta, he's a lot closer to home if he's in Columbia than he is in Los Angeles. So I think that's a little feather in the cap, if you will, if you're Carolina, and maybe something to try to capitalize on when they do get him in for an official visit. Be like, hey, 3+ hour car ride is still a shorter trip than hopping on a plane and flying across the country, bud. So just maybe something to keep in mind as they try to make this thing happen.
And playing in a pretty much warm SEC venues in November instead of potentially playing in Champaign, Illinois, or Madison, Wisconsin, or Ann Arbor, Michigan in late November.
Or Piscataway, New Jersey, or wherever Northwestern is outside of Chicago. The list goes on. But yeah, and I would imagine that hey, playing the SEC, this is a traditional conference still over here. Like you can play at a bunch of schools that are near Atlanta too. Like your family can travel pretty short distances to come watch you play, as opposed to trying to jet set across the country, literally, to see your games.
No doubt about it. So a couple of other prospects to ask you about. So we have not had you back on the show since 5-star defensive end Dylan Stewart committed to South Carolina. Just how big was that for Shane Beamer and his program? And how big was it for Sterling Lucas that this guy cared so much about his future position coach, he decided to do it on the same day that his wife was induced to give birth to their twin daughters?
Yeah, I mean that was a nice little touch on his part, and I would imagine that it was by design that's how it all was put together by Dylan Stewart. Even went so far as to change his profile picture on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. And I think it's still Sterling Lucas on there. So, clearly there's a good rapport between those two. And getting Stewart in this class was, I mean, we've been talking about this guy as the top defensive end in the country, according to Carolina's coaches, for more than a year now. And apparently that's not the only staff in college football that shares that opinion. Just a huge, I mean, you can't even describe how big it is to get a pass rusher like that. If for no other reason, like they need some serious help at that position moving forward. I mean, I've gone so far as to say that Dylan Stewart was joining this team for the 2023 season, that he would be playing and having a chance to make an impact, make a difference. He's just that good, and that's also maybe a product of where things are at defensive end right now for South Carolina. It's huge, man. And then you look at what that attention has brought on the recruiting trail, and guys like Jordan Seaton, the number 1 ranked interior offensive lineman in the country, who's at IMG Academy right now, but is a DC kid. and there wasn't really anything going on. I think he put out a top 14 or top 12 or whatever, earlier this summer, I guess, and South Carolina wasn't even in it. And now he's talking about coming down for an official visit, or I guess coming up for an official visit to South Carolina. He's never been to Columbia. And yeah, he wants to check it out because one of the best players in the country, who's also from his part of the country, is coming to Carolina. So those types of commitments are huge, and when you get them, they're definitely worth celebrating.
No doubt about it. So Jordan Seaton was the next guy I was going to ask you about. He is the number 1 ranked interior offensive lineman in the country. He's from Washington, D.C. He's at IMG, and he has been lighting up social media with South Carolina stuff since Dylan Stewart's commitment. Now he's set an official visit date for November the 18th, which is the Kentucky weekend. And so he's been to Alabama. Florida is heavily involved. Do you think he makes it to November 18th uncommitted?
I think so. I think he's got a bunch of places he wants to go visit. Oklahoma is one of them. There are some others. I think maybe Miami's kind of in the mix as well. I do think he'll make it that far. And yeah, even if he were to suddenly commit somewhere, maybe the door's still open. But yeah, I think so. I'm speculating a little bit. I don't have anything to base that off of other than just my own thoughts. But yeah, I think he'll still be uncommitted by then, and he's obviously expressed a lot of interest in seeing what all the fuss is about in Columbia. So I would think that he follows through on that visit one way or another.
All right, so the last guy is Jordan Seaton's teammate, but he's also, or maybe it's just maybe I misspoke there, but Ernest Willer Jr., 6'3", 247. He's also a DMV guy, a defensive end, a 4-star guy. South Carolina seems to be very involved with him. And so that's another name, that's kind of popped up recently to kind of track throughout the season that South Carolina could bring in for an official visit and hope to add to the class in December. Your thoughts on Ernest Willer Jr.?
Yeah, there's a little traction there. He's not scheduled a visit to Carolina, but I anticipate him trying to do so. He was at IMG, Keith, and now he's moved back up to the DMV area. I can't remember off the top of my head which school it is, but yeah, he's classified as a defensive lineman by 24/7. I think he's being kind of looked at as an edge for the Gamecocks, but whatever the case may be, they need more help in addition to Dylan Stewart up front. Obviously, that's the only guy they got committed in 24 that's going to play on the defensive line. So whether he's an edge, whether he's a tackle, or a combination of the two, he's a highly rated guy and a good player. So you take as many of those as you can, and especially along the D line, and maybe just sort it out down the road. But yeah, definitely a guy on the radar for us as we're getting closer here to the season getting going.
All right, good stuff. So let's switch to Gamecock football now. South Carolina had their first scrimmage over the weekend yesterday. Offensive players met with the media. And so from what you've been able to see and glean from your sources and what the players have said, what's your overall impressions of week one of year 3 for Shane Beamer with this football team?
I don't know that I have any overall impressions. I honestly haven't sat down and tried to think that way. I just so caught up in the day to day and what we do from a media standpoint. But I think the offense is going to have some opportunities to be explosive. I think they're going to probably be a little more, a little smarter, I guess, with the way maybe they utilize some of their playmakers and what they're asking them to do. Like, I've used the example of Amarian Brown because that was one that was mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago. Like, I'm not going to be asking Amarian Brown to try to block linebackers or do some things that a guy who's 5'11", 170 pounds, soaking wet. Like, how about we just have him, try to catch the ball on a deep route, or get him in space to make plays, not trying to free up somebody else on a screen pass or whatever. So that's just one little example. And I think it goes back to what Dow Loggins was talking about when he first got to Columbia is just getting guys in space, playing with good pace, and just trying to be, I guess, use a little common sense maybe with the offense. I think that was probably an issue with the previous guy calling plays, is thinking too much and trying to maybe be a little too complicated for the sake of just being complicated. And I don't think that's going to be the case with this guy calling plays. I'm not sitting here trying to say it's going to be, the most explosive and one of the best offensives in the SEC, but I would think that they're going to be a little bit better than what they've been in the past. And I think that hearing guys like Spencer Rattler talking yesterday, saying it's one of the best camps he's been a part of, I think that he truly means that. I don't think he's just saying that to say it. I think there's some genuine excitement within this group of guys on offense and what this thing could look like and what it's going to be. So we'll see how that unfolds here in about 2 weeks. But coming out of the first week and that preseason scrimmage on Saturday, I think there's some excitement that's building amongst those guys internally, and they're probably ready to start showing people that they can be more like what was on the field or what was shown in that Tennessee and Clemson game, as opposed to like Florida or Missouri or some of those other stinkers that they had last fall.
No doubt about it. And so what struck me about Spencer Rattler's comments was just how much of a better fit this offense is for him. And then just his confidence level and the playmakers around him. I mean, let's face it. Amarian Brown transferred from Georgia Tech after breaking Megatron, Calvin Johnson's freshman touchdown record. And in 23 games, the previous guy, a.k.a. Captain Dumbass on Gamecock Pod Daily, as we refer to him, 0 touchdowns for Amarian Brown in 23 games. I think that's going to change this year.
Yeah, I mean, when you got a guy with 100 meter speed in high school and has done it at the college level, it's not like he just, came out of high school and is just this little skinny guy who's needed a couple years to develop. Like, he's done it. He's done it in Power 5 leagues against Power 5 teams. Like, yeah, I mean, for whatever reason, Amarian Brown was a little underutilized for the last 2 seasons, and maybe that changes here in his last season of college ball. Certainly excited to see it. I think he'll probably put up some better numbers than he did these last 2 years.
So with Juice Wells sidelined in the early part of fall camp, players yesterday talked about Xavier Legette being the biggest playmaker of fall camp. And so, I thought that Tax Slayer Gator Bowl was really critical for him. O'Donnell Fortune, Marcellus Dial, a lot of guys moving forward. Do you think this is the year for Xavier Leggett, as he says? I guess we've just been calling him Leggett, but Leggett, I say it's kind of like, it looks like McBee, but it's MacBee. It looks like Leggett, but it's Leggett. So your thoughts on the playmakers, on the Juice Wells injury and tight ends?
Yeah, as far as Wells goes, we'll have to just kind of wait and see how that plays out. There's some optimism that he'll be ready to go for the start of the season. He's said that apparently in conversations with Beamer, and Beamer certainly expressed that the other night or afternoon, whatever time it was on Saturday. And they do need him in this offense. Like his presence will greatly change things. And you could probably say the same thing about Trey Knox, who's been a little banged up too here lately. But Leggett, his thing with him, like I've said a million times with you, Keith, is like if he can just catch that thing, he's electric as all hell. He is big, fast, and strong, and if that ball's in his hands, like he can do like he did against Texas A&M and take that opening kickoff to the house, or make plays like he did against Notre Dame in the bowl game. So I think there's a lot of confidence from him and his ability as a receiver. I think having a receivers coach in Justin Stepp, who's really stresses the fundamentals of doing what one of the most important things is when playing receivers, making the catch. And I think that's although at times it was still an issue last season, I think coming into this one, there's a lot of confidence in his ability to catch the ball and make some plays. So yeah, those guys, Juice, Leggett, I guess, Trey Knox are probably at the top of the list as far as, playmakers in the passing game. I put Josh Simon up there. I think Amari Brown, of course, who we've talked about already. Nick Harbour is going to be involved in some way, shape, or form. And you got the backs like DeCarrion Joyner and Juju McDowell, who are running backs, obviously, but they're pretty established pass catchers as well. So I think we'll see them. Megan Blake has apparently done some good things, especially with this opportunity to step in for Wells as he's been banged up. And yeah, Elijah Caldwell was a name heard a lot in the summer after he got in. So perhaps he'll continue to emerge and be a guy. So yeah, there might be somebody else who I'm missing off the top of my head, but that's a pretty nice collection of names. We'll just have to see how it all sorts itself out here coming up once the season gets going.
All right, so on the offensive line, it seems like, at least from what's being said, maybe 4 out of those 5 positions are pretty settled. Ja'Kai Moore at left tackle, Nick Gargiulo at left guard, Rashawn Lee at center, Trey Jones maybe at right guard, and then big Sidney Fugar down to 315 pounds, and Tyshawn Wanamaker kind of battling it out. But Wanamaker's also been cross-training inside at guard. I mean, at this point, that kind of seems like the only position battle on offense. I mean, Rattler said yesterday, DK is our guy. We're rolling with him at running back. Obviously, you mentioned the receivers. I think maybe the rotational guys, there's some battles there at tight end. It's clearly Trey Knox and Joshua Simon. And so how do you see this offensive line shaking out?
Yeah, I think that Rashawn Lee and Nick Gargiulo are pretty set at that left guard and center spot. Lee at center. I like the idea of Sidney Fugar being the guy at right tackle just because he's such a massive human being. Like he's huge, like really big. Trey Jones as a guy who's not quite as big as you draw it up as an SEC interior lineman, but he's a really good athlete, and which we've seen with him doing some of the stuff he's done in the past as like a fullback. But he's been around. I think you probably say he's dependable, that type of deal. Ja'Kai Moore's got a lot of experience playing, not all at left tackle, but a good amount. And I think that if that's the 5 rolling into that North Carolina game, you feel as good as you can about it and see how it shakes out. Whether it's those 5 or take one and add another or 2 or whatever the case may be, I think there'll probably be some mixing and matching as this thing plays out over the course of the season, and it'll probably evolve and change as it goes on. But yeah, I think it's sort of that 5 as we sit here right now, 2 weeks out.
All right, so let's switch to defense. And I thought the biggest news coming out of the scrimmage defensively from Shane Beamer was, there we go, get some juice going.
Yeah.
Jordan Strong and Mo Kaba in the scrimmage. We've heard from Jordan Strong. We've heard from Sterling Lucas talk about him looking bigger, stronger, faster, better than before the injury. Really had not been that much talk about Mo Kaba, but to me, he is the most experienced linebacker in the group of linebackers, and a guy that, I think was poised to have a breakout year last year, and then his season got cut short in the first half of that Arkansas game. How big of a factor can Mo Kaba be moving forward at the linebacker position?
Well, I think it probably just depends on how good they feel about those other guys, because I go back to conversation with Clayton White at the end of July when he was talking about feeling like the staff felt like they needed to not rush Jordan Strong and Mo Kaba back. And obviously the 2 different guys, so the injuries are, although they're the same injury on the same leg, like they're going to respond and recover differently. That's just how it goes. But they didn't want to rush those guys back. That they have a little more of a luxury at linebacker and being able to take their time with Mo Kaba because they're good about, I think, at least that was the case going into camp. I don't know if that's changed. Probably not. But, between Stone Blanton and Debo Williams and Pup Howard and Bam Scott, like that's 4 guys right there. They haven't even mentioned Mo Kaba that they could probably stick on the field and be okay with and allow Mo Kaba to take his time. Whereas at defensive end, it's like, all right, you got Tyreek Johnson, who's been hurt for 6 years off and on. Got Jatius Jeter, who's pretty good player at Syracuse, but he just got here. He's still learning the system. Then you got an undersized guy in Brian Thomas Jr. and Jordan Strong. so not a lot to work with there as far as like the amount of good experienced players who aren't injury prone. Like they're just little different situation between the 2 positions. So either way, if Mo Kaba's healthy enough to play and be out on the field, like I think he's probably going to be doing those things, like playing and being out on the field. I don't know what his workload has been like this spring. Same with Strong, but they've been participating in like team stuff in the limited views we've had during preseason camp so far this month, and apparently they were on the field this past Saturday. So I think I would imagine the coaching staff is going to try to help keep getting them healthier as we get closer to the season, and not ask them to do too much on the field, especially since they've been around and no Clayton White system. Like they've been in it since this thing started going 2 years ago. So they probably feel really good from that standpoint because they're both smart guys and seem to be on their way respectively last season to having really good seasons before they went down. So I think it would be tremendous if you can enter week one with those guys and not feel too like you got to restrict them on game day. That'd be really nice for Clayton White to be able to have those guys, because I think again, going back to last season when the defense had a pretty sharp drop off in that Arkansas game, like it was dramatic how different things were without those two guys. I mean, it's probably really challenging for a player to see, one of their teammates get helped off the field, and you hear on the sideline that he has an ACL and he's done. Well, then you got two of those guys, and they're probably your two best players. So that's pretty significant in my eyes, and I think we saw that play out over the course of last season at various times. Like, who knows how different things would have been for that defense if those guys were healthy and on the field. But I do know that if Jordan Strong was healthy and on the field, like, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about him right now as a member of this defense at South Carolina. So, yeah.
All right. So last question before we let you go, obligations to attend to. So one of the things that struck me about Travian Robertson's comments, I believe it was at Birdies with Beamer, was comparing Tonka Hemingway to Melvin Ingram and how he was used at South Carolina. Because of the lack of numbers on the edge, could we see Tonka Hemingway play defensive end like he did as a freshman on rundowns, and then slide inside a la Melvin Ingram in the Rabbits package, and then bring in a JT Gear or another pass rusher on passing downs?
Yeah, I think that's probably safe to say that Tonka Hemingway ain't going to just be a three technique, throughout the course of the season. I think we'll see him moving around, and even if they were really deep at defensive end, I would think that Clayton White would probably like to do some different things and keep opposing offenses guessing, like, where's this guy going to be? What is he going to be doing? Just to provide some issues, and you hear it all the time, and I don't think it's just coach speak, but they talk about wanting to get their best 11 guys on the field. So whatever that looks like, if it's Tonka Hemingway playing inside, outside, I think we're going to see plenty of him and Jordan Strong, obviously, and probably Jatias Jeer on the field at the same time. And whether that's just the three of them lining up with their hand on the ground, or somebody else, or whatever it might look like. I think we're going to see Tonka Hemingway bouncing around from different spots and doing some different things, and trying to keep opposing offensive coordinators guessing. He's a really good player, and as we saw last season, he's certainly capable of doing a couple different things and doing pretty well, for sure.
All right. Well,
TJ Sanders could possibly, sorry to cut you off, Keith. TJ Sanders could be another guy potentially who maybe bounces around a little bit and tries to shake things up that way as far as where he lines up and what he's doing.
All right. Well, great stuff from Hale McGranahan today. Hale, as always, thanks for being so gracious with your time, especially on a day where you've got other obligations, and great stuff as always. And we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road, my friend.
Yes, sir, Keith. Appreciate you having me. Always a pleasure.
All right. All right, so that was Hale McGranahan and Emily Adams from earlier this morning, both pre-recorded today because of media availability with the defensive players, but still really great stuff. And can't thank everybody enough for being with us today. A lot of action in the Nana's Porch chat box. Appreciate that. And hey, so full disclaimer, we don't only bring on people that are going to be wearing garnet colored glasses. Okay. Beat reporters are not supposed to be fans. All right. And so while there are certainly some questions about Dakereon Joyner playing running back, I mean, this is like his 6th year of playing college football. And, you know, he's only started one game at quarterback. But when he did it, he was pretty damn good, wasn't he? 9 for 9 for over 160 yards and 2 touchdowns, and ran the ball extremely well, made great decisions the entire game. This guy's just a football player and selfless. And that's why I think he's going to be one of the surprise players on the team, provided he can stay healthy at running back. Defensively, I think Travian Robertson is going to make a huge difference up front. Okay. I think those guys are going to be much better. They're going to play much faster, much more explosive, with more violent hands, with more gap integrity. And I think there's plenty of players to work with up there. And I think, like Hale just said, not only Tonka Hemingway, you could see Elijah Davis or TJ Sanders setting up on rundowns as a big defensive end because of their athleticism. I don't think TJ Sanders weighs 300 pounds anymore. So look for that. And, you know, Mo Kaba, they are going to bring him along slowly, just like Jordan Strong. You know what? Just like Hale said, those are your best. Those were probably your best 2 players on defense last year. Okay. As my good friend Brad Lawing always said, when Travian and Melvin and, Clowney, Devin Taylor, Cliff Matthews, all those guys were veteran players, Lottie Adjaboy, Clifton Gathers. They don't need to be repping in every scrimmage and every full contact period. It's their job to get those guys to the first football game, which is a huge game, healthy. And so I do think we'll see Mo Kaba continue to come along slowly. But I do expect to see him on the field barring a setback against North Carolina. I think Jordan Strong is a little bit further along in his recovery, but you need Stone Blanton healthy. You need Pup Howard healthy. Okay, you need Bam Martin Scott. And as far as the secondary goes, they're not going to be young. Okay, yes, DQ Smith and Nick Eamon are sophomores. Okay, but if you don't see Kilgore in the starting lineup and Spalding is in the lineup, all right, then Spalding, he is a guy that's a 5th-year player. Okay, Marcellus Dial and O'Donnell Fortune are veteran players. Marcellus Dial, can he step up and be that number 1 corner instead of a number 2? Sure, he's got to answer that question. O'Donnell Fortune, can he build off of the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl performance against Notre Dame? He's got to show it. But let me put it this way. If there's one secondary coach in the country that you would want getting guys coached up to play early in their careers, it is Torian Gray. I mean, look what he did with Jalen Foster, Carlins Patel, Darius Rush, okay, Nick Emanwari, DQ Smith, coming out of nowhere as true freshmen. So maybe I do have garnet colored glasses on, but I do believe, South Carolina's got to improve their run defense. That starts up front and with the linebackers, but also having that seventh guy up in the box. Is it DQ Smith? Is it David Spalding? Could it be Jalen Kilgore later in the year? We will see. So thanks to everybody who joined in live. Thanks to everybody in the Nana's Porch chat box. Craig, Matt, for sure, and others. Really appreciate everybody in the Nana's Porch chat box today. I'll be back tomorrow. All right. We will certainly hear from some Gamecock offensive and defensive players, and then we'll wrap up the week on Friday. So until tomorrow, Keith Alsep signing off. God bless America. Go Gamecocks. And thanks to all of you for tuning in today. I'm out of here.